again. Good afternoon, everyone, and I want to thank everyone who is joining us here today. And I'm pleased to be here at the Loyal Edmonton Regiment Military Museum to participate in an announcement about improving job-protected leave for reservists. As Alberta's military liaison to the Canadian Armed Forces, I've heard from members of the military that changes to Alberta's reservist leave were needed to better support our men and women in uniform. You know, I've been in this role for just about 3 years now, and I've always been appreciative of the Premier and the government's support on these initiatives. It is important to highlight that the Premier and the ministers have always had an open door and been willing to work with me on issues facing Canadian Forces members, veterans, and their families. This builds off the work of Bill 207, the Reservist Recognition Day, which also lowers the time frame before leave can be requested from 26 weeks down to 12. And I'm proud to say that Alberta's government has listened to the concerns of reservists and is making further changes. Improvements to the reservist leave is just one change being introduced in the Labour Statutes Amendment Act. Joining us today is the Premier and the Minister of Labour and Immigration, as well as the Minister of the Status of Women, who will provide more details on this bill in a moment. But before I turn things over to the Premier, I'd like to introduce Carolyn Patent, also joining us, the Alberta Chair of the Canadian Forces Liaison Council, Captain Richard Dumas, a retired member of the Canadian Forces, as well as Aditi Loveridge, founder and CEO of the Pregnancy and Infant Loss Support Centre. I hope I got that right, Aditi. Thank you. I would now like to introduce the Premier to join us here at the podium to say a few words.
Well, good morning. Thank you so much, Brad, for the intro and your great work as Alberta's government liaison to the Canadian Armed Forces. Thank you, Captain, for welcoming us here to the Loyal Edmonton Regiment Museum, a great part of Canada's military history and our present military service with a great militia reserve regiment that has served this country with great distinction for decades. I'm delighted to be here with my colleagues to make an important announcement. In the speech from the throne that kicked off this session of Alberta's legislature, Her Honour the Lieutenant Governor announced that the upcoming changes to the Employment Standards Code will provide extra job protection to workers on two fronts. The 3-day bereavement leave currently offered when a family member passes away will be extended to employees who experience a miscarriage or stillbirth, recognizing the pain and grief experienced by parents who lose an unborn child. The 20-day limit for unpaid military reservist leave will be removed, recognizing that reservists often train for longer periods. We must honor and support those who serve our country in uniform. So today we are making good on these commitments with the introduction of this legislation in the legislature that will provide stronger leave protection for parents who have lost an unborn child as a result of stillbirth or miscarriage, and also longer job protection for reservists who have a more extended training or military service periods. And we're doing that through Bill 17. It also includes some technical amendments with respect to post-secondary institution unions. These are important and compassionate measures. First of all, let me speak to the provision to extend bereavement leave to parents who've experienced a miscarriage or stillbirth. It is hard to imagine the grief that such parents feel when they're preparing to welcome a new child in their families only to experience the tragedy of stillbirth or miscarriage. It is a deeply emotional time, a time of grief, and a time when parents need to be together to grieve through the loss and to take care of themselves. And it's so important that we recognize the reality of that loss, a loss in their family. And that is why we are extending this bereavement leave across the province to parents who have gone through the tragedy of miscarriage. And we hope this is one small way that their grief and their loss can be recognized, and they can know that others in the community stand with them as they work through that terrible loss, that tragedy. Secondly, we could not have an effective military without our reserve regiments. They have always been a critical part of Canada's armed forces from the very beginning. Over 150 years ago, Canada's military was largely a voluntary militia made up of the historic regiments that when they were not part of a permanent full-time military. They were there to be called upon at times of crisis to defend Canada. The Loyal Edmonton Regiment is a good example of the militia reserve regiments that have been such a critical part of our military. When Canada was called upon to oppose military aggression in Europe in the Great War and in the Second World War in Korea, we called upon these reserve forces to stand up and massively to expand Canada's military force almost overnight. And so the network of these reserve units is a critically important part of Canada's military effectiveness. I know this as the former Minister of National Defence. During my tenure, I actually launched an extensive review of the Canadian militia reserve units and how we could better support them to do their job. It's vitally important that employers and governments recognize the sacrifices that reservists make. They sign up to be willing to take time away from family and their income-producing jobs in order to do training or engage in deployment both here at home and abroad, even in places of war and conflict. We had many reservists serving, for example, in the Canadian UN mission in Afghanistan. And it is unacceptable for soldiers, sailors, and aviators in our reserve units to come home only to find that they've lost their jobs, or that they've been demoted, or that they've lost seniority, and that they've paid a price in their income and their finances and their financial security because of their service to Canada. I want to thank MLA Brad Rutherford for having first raised this issue with his Bill 207 in a previous session of the legislature, and the government is taking additional measures here today to expand the 20-day limit for military reservist leave, to remove the cap, in fact, recognizing that reservists often train for longer periods. And we hope this will be a small but important way to recognize the sacrifices made by our military reservists. I should also recognize MLA Jordan Walker from Sherwood Park for his private member's bill that initially proposed the bereavement leave for the parents of children who have died through miscarriage or through a stillbirth, and want to appreciate his work, and we're taking forward his idea from that private member's bill and enshrining it in this government legislation here today. So these are important, I think, compassionate measures to recognize both grieving parents and Canadian soldiers and sailors and aviators. We're pleased to bring forward this bill and look forward to its expeditious passage in Alberta's legislature. And with that, I will introduce our Minister of Labour and Immigration, Kaycee Madu, to speak further to Bill 17.
Thank you, Premier. Good afternoon, everyone. I am pleased to be here with my colleagues and our special guest. Later today, I will be introducing Bill 17, the Labour Statutes Amendment Act 2022. This act updates labour laws to add clarity and flexibility to the rules for reservist and bereavement leaves and maintains the status quo at post-secondary institutions. As Premier mentioned, changes in the Labour Statutes Amendment Act would better address the need of our armed forces reservists to take time off work to attend the annual training. Oftentimes, reservists are deployed on a Canadian Forces operations, such as responding to emergencies like fires or flood, or serving on international missions. And these missions may take longer than 20 days. Having a 20-day limit on training means that the reservists are sometimes forced to use their vacation days in order to complete their training. Bill 17 removes the 20-day limit for reservists. Reservists perform valuable services for our province and country, and we want to honor their commitment and their sacrifice by allowing them enough time to train for the very many challenges that they face in carrying out their duties. Bill 17 deals with another important area, bereavement leave. There are few experiences as heartbreaking as losing a child. Expectant parents who lose a child through miscarriage or stillbirth are suddenly facing the loss of plans and dreams for their future. These parents deserve job-protected leave to allow them to take time away from work, to grieve, and to be with their family members. If passed, the Labour Statutes Amendment Act would update Alberta's laws to include miscarriage and stillbirth as times when parents can take bereavement leave. For example, biological parents, adoptive parents, and surrogate parents would all be able to take bereavement leave when a stillbirth or miscarriage happens. This allows employees to take time to spend with their families and care for themselves during a time of sudden and tragic loss. This is the right thing to do, and giving these parents time to grieve is long overdue, and I am proud to be part of a government that finally recognizes this and put it into action statutorily. Bill 17 would also allow academic staff, graduate students, and postdoctoral fellow associations to continue representing their members during collective bargaining. These groups have the experience and expertise to represent their members. Our only change is that we are removing the expiry date of this agreement for post-secondary bargaining. This option has been enjoyed by post-secondary faculty associations since 1981, and we are maintaining the status quo. Removing this expiry date does not take away their members' right to strike if they so choose. And as Premier Kenney noted, it means academic staff, graduate students, and postdoctoral fellows will be represented by associations who have existing relationships with post-secondary administration and already know how to represent them well. Albertans work hard, and they deserve protections on the job, whether it is the ability to take job-protected leave or to have consistent representation from a qualified association. The Labour Statutes Amendment Act updates bereavement and reservist leaves to show compassion for grieving parents of an unborn child and provide flexibility and appreciation for the work reservists do, who help to keep our country safe. It also preserves the status quo for academic staff, graduate students, and postdoctoral fellows associations to recognize the role they play representing their members. I look forward to introducing this act in the legislature today to preserve and improve employee protections. And thank you so much. I would now invite my colleague, Associate Minister Isaac, to provide her remarks. Thank you.
Good afternoon, and thank you. And it's really a pleasure to be here on this site in particular. It reminds me of a similar site in Calgary where I spent time as a child when my father served in the militia. So it's a really lovely site. Well, this afternoon we're here to speak about bereavement leave for parents who have lost a child through miscarriage and stillbirth. It's one of the most devastating experiences that a parent-to-be can go through, and parents need time to heal emotionally and deal with their immense loss. It's normal to grieve, not just for the loss of their baby, but for the life that they had planned for themselves and with their child. In addition to removing the 20-day limit on the amount of time reservists can take to attend annual training, as was recently talked about, if passed, Bill 17 would allow employees to take bereavement leave when a pregnancy ends in a miscarriage or stillbirth. There are no words that can truly explain the loss and despair that parents go through when coming to terms with the loss of a child. There are memories that are never made, joy and love that will exist only in our hearts, and words that never get to be said. It is my hope that no Albertan has to take bereavement leave for the loss of their baby, but we know that this is simply not the case. Sadly, this tragic loss will happen to many families in our province. Mothers and fathers in Alberta must know that they are not alone while navigating the unfamiliar emotions that surround the loss of a child who never made it home. For mothers, there is added physical strain when our bodies recover from a lost pregnancy, and we know this experience is incredibly difficult for many. Alberta's government recognizes and empathizes with your grief and pain, and this bill, should it be passed, will make Alberta the second only province in Canada to specifically provide bereavement leave for pregnancy loss. Allowing parents to take the time they need to grieve is an important step towards creating compassionate communities that better support the balance between life and work for families in Alberta. Thank you very much, and I'd really like now to introduce you to Aditi Loveridge, who's the CEO of the Pregnancy and Infant Loss Support Centre.
Hello. First, I would like to honor and acknowledge the land in which we are occupying today for this very important meeting. I acknowledge that we are on Treaty 6 territory, the traditional and ancestral territory of the Cree, the Dene, Blackfoot, Saulteaux, and Nakota Sioux. We acknowledge that this territory is home to the Métis settlements and the Métis Nation of Alberta, Regions 2, 3, and 4, within the historical Northwest Métis homeland. Premier Kenney, Minister Madu, I want to thank you very much for your invitation to speak at your announcement today. It is a privilege and an honor to be here. This bereavement bill should be considered and is considered an extremely important stepping stone for our community. This bill is life-changing legislation for many individuals in Alberta, bereaved families, myself included. It is comforting to see that this bill became a nonpartisan issue, thanks to MLA Walker, who offered to sponsor the bill and offered his support throughout the process. MLA Walker's constant support and the fact that you've reached out to our organization for clarity and insight is absolutely heartwarming. You've been a great ally and advocate for grieving individuals experiencing pregnancy loss, and I want to deeply thank you for that. 1 in 4 known pregnancies end in loss, and 4.5 in 1,000 babies are born still. The traumatic impact of these losses is profound. I see it every day in the work that I do. This bill provides a space for employees to engage in vulnerable and difficult conversations with their employer. It is a chance to promote and facilitate healthy support for the many grieving individuals in the workplace. Support from employers can make a deep impact on how individuals move forward in their grief recovery. The Pregnancy and Infant Loss Support Centre will always be there as a resource and support for employers and their employees who are facing a loss of their baby, as well as the loss of their dreams and of their hopes of their future. My hope is that this bill, actually, you just said it. I didn't know too much about the bill previously, so you said that earlier. I'm just so excited to hear that this is an opportunity to deepen the conversation regarding bereavement. Grief, loss, and parentality should not solely be defined based on gender, marital status, sexual orientation. Everyone has a story, and everyone deserves to be heard. Without having seen the bill, I now know today that this bill is for individuals experiencing loss, no matter what the cause of that loss was, and they will be entitled to this 3-day leave. That includes people who have had miscarriage, termination for medical reasons, navigating fertility, failed adoption, surrogates. I was very grateful to hear those words, Minister Madu. This is an opportunity for us to be inclusive and recognize that grief and loss is as unique as it is complex, and this bill is doing that. It takes a village to accomplish great things, and MLA Walker, Premier Kenney, Minister Madu, I want to once again thank you for your continued support. You promoting this bill to become a government bill and being mentioned in the throne speech brings hope, light, and faith to the 1 in 4 Albertans who are grieving. Thank you very much. And I would like to introduce Carolyn Patton, who is, I'm sorry, is the chair of the Canadian Forces Liaison Council.
Thank you for the kind introduction, Aditi, and also for the important land acknowledgement. Good afternoon. The Canadian Forces Liaison Council is a national organization working in partnership with the Department of National Defence. We are comprised of both business leaders, reserve military members who act as a bridge between employers, institutions, and the reservists that they employ or enroll. CFLC builds expanded and diverse relationships that highlight the value of reservists. We also ensure that employers, educational institutions, communities share the benefits of reservist training and development. Reservists are employees, co-workers, students, our neighbors. They bring invaluable skills to their civilian workplaces, such as leadership, commitment, strong communications, teamwork, and hard work. When we as a society take steps to support our reservists, we help to ensure the dedicated men and women of our military can support us and others around the world, especially in times of need, such as we are experiencing right now. As Alberta Chair for the Canadian Forces Liaison Council, this is welcome news for Alberta reservists. Removing the 20-day limit provides reservists greater flexibility to pursue a civilian career path without having to give up on their mission of serving their country. It will provide opportunity to further their military training and the development of transferable skills that enhance the workplace. It's also an assurance that our workforce and our communities will be able to make the most of their experience and these remarkable men and women that they offer. The changes made to the Reservist Leave in the Labour Statutes Amendment Act complements the Reservist Recognition Act, a private member's bill brought forward by MLA Brad Rutherford, and recognizes the last Saturday in September as Reservist Recognition Day. The Act also reduces the number of weeks required for reservists to take leave from employment from 26 weeks down to 12 weeks. Employees are eligible for reservist leave if they are, of course, a reservist and have been employed at least 12 weeks with the same employer. The changes made today recognize the important role of reservists in protecting our safety, our security, and increases the awareness of the invaluable contributions the reservists make to the Alberta communities and specifically our country. To all reservists, thank you for your service. To employers, educators, and the Government of Alberta, thank you for your support of reservists. I'd like to invite Captain Rick Dumas, retired member of the Canadian Forces, to say a few words. Welcome, Rick.
Good day, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. The Museum Board of Directors is honored to host this event, just as we have with new Canadian swearing-in ceremonies in the past. The Loyal Edmonton Regiment has been an integral part of this city since its inception as the First World War was getting fired up, a mere 10 years after Alberta joined Confederation. Welcome to the museum and the city's historic Prince of Wales Armoury. At 17 years of age, I was excited to join the reserves in 1977. That's right, you heard me right, 1977. In addition to my increased financial independence, I wasn't just finding myself, I was creating myself. Later, I would join the regular army. Throughout my service in the regular army, with the United Nations in Cyprus, with NATO in former Yugoslavia, the International Coalition in Afghanistan, I observed the exemplary service of hundreds of reservists from across the country, forming relationships with many of them. Canadians that have suffered at the hands of natural disasters, to include COVID-19, were grateful in having these troops show up at the expense of leaving their own families and putting their civilian lives on hold. As an adjutant in a reserve unit, I was impressed with their ability to answer the many calls to duty, integrating with the regular Army during rigorous training exercises, participating on tours of duty that to this day have potentially influenced and impacted how Ukraine has fared out during this current war. They also participated in unique assignments as individuals in places like Lebanon, Israel, Afghanistan, and even stood by for a possible deployment to the Philippines after a typhoon had killed more than 6,000 people. Many actually took vacation time to go on career courses, brigade training events every summer, and domestic operations. These citizen soldiers' devotion to service and duty is unparalleled by any other societal dynamic. Canada wouldn't be the country it is without volunteerism, and that especially includes military service. To quote Sir Winston Churchill, "You make a living by what you get, you make a life by what you give." Now, as much as I recognize that many people have a different calling in life, I also appreciate the many that support the military community by way of promoting the Royal Canadian Legion, the Family Resources Centre, the Veterans Association Food Bank, Homes for Heroes and Valor Place, etc. Today's news is most welcomed. Just as many of the business community fosters philanthropy, the vast array of employers can do more to support the reservist. There is payback for the employer by way of character building and enhancing unique skill sets unavailable elsewhere. For example, a trained private soldier is capable of providing leadership within a civilian environment, given it's a military-oriented culture. The emphasis needs to be on teamwork. Employers give up a soldier for whatever time it takes, getting in return a better trained and fulfilled employee. Supporting those that serve us makes the civilian employer an actual force multiplier and a community asset. Just to let you know, to put a plug in for Carolyn's CFLC, annually, employers that have distinguished themselves in promoting reservists are recognized at an annual event. Typically, it's the Lieutenant Governor that hosts it at Government House. From this point on, especially during the implementation phase, I wish every good fortune to the Canadian Forces Liaison Council as they work with the provincial liaison to the Canadian Armed Forces. I wish you every success in regard to this important initiative. Thank you kindly.
Thank you to all of our speakers. That concludes our formal speaking portion. We're going to move to the media Q&A. A reminder that anything relating to the bill today is embargoed until the bill is tabled in the House at around 3:15. We're going to start on the phones. If you have a question in person, please line up at the media mic here. Operator, can you please put through our first caller?
Thank you. Carrie Tate, Globe and Mail.
Hi, thanks for taking my question. This is for the Premier. You've increasingly been more explicit that you expect party members to fall into line should you win the leadership review. I'm wondering if you are preparing or intend to remove some outspoken members of your caucus.
Well, my focus right now is on delivering for Albertans, making sure that we continue the momentum of our economic growth and recovery, the balanced budget, the diversification that's happening, also keeping our commitments to Albertans and making life better for Albertans. That's why we're introducing Bill 17 today that extends job protection for reservists and also offers it to bereavement leave to parents who have lost children through stillbirths and miscarriage. Just as yesterday, we extended services to Ukrainian refugees arriving in Alberta. and earlier this week announced a $600 million package to ensure that Albertans have the skills needed for the jobs of tomorrow. So my focus is on getting the job done for Albertans. Our members of the United Conservative Party will be voting over the next couple of weeks. I will respect the outcome of that vote, and I expect all members of our team to do the same.
Go ahead, Carrie.
Thank you. This sort of didn't quite address what I was asking. I understand that you're focused on Alberta, and part of doing that means having a functional government and caucus. And so, again, I hate to repeat such a question, but are you willing to take a step that involves removing some of your members?
Well, you know, my hope and expectation is that all members of the government caucus will respect the decision of our grassroots members. I certainly will. I made that clear in my keynote address at our virtual special general meeting 2 weeks ago, and I'm happy to be held accountable. But at the end of the day, our members will decide, and that'll be the end of this internal argument, because we have to get on with the job of serving Albertans. That's certainly my focus, and that's why every single day I'm out there working hard to deliver with our team to make life better for Albertans.
Thanks, Premier. Operator, can you please put through our next caller?
Aaron Collins, CBC National.
Hi, it's a question for the Premier. Thanks for taking it. You and about 60 other Canadians, Premier, have been sanctioned by the Russian government. Just wanted to get a quick reaction. Have you had to cancel any plans to travel to Moscow or anything like that?
No, I didn't have any imminent plans to visit the Kremlin. I'm honored to have been included in Vladimir Putin's blacklist of Canadians. My only question is, what took you so long? In 2015, as the Minister of National Defense, I actually launched the Canadian Armed Forces training mission in Ukraine, Operation Unifier, which has played a key role in modernizing Ukraine's military to the point where they're so effectively fighting back against Putin's outrageous war crimes today. I also ensured the delivery of tons of military equipment to support Ukraine following Putin's invasion of the Donbass region, and also provided very valuable real-time high-resolution radar satellite images to Ukraine. I played a seminal role in Canada recognizing the genocidal nature of Stalin's Holodomor famine genocide in 1932 and 1933. And have always been a huge friend and supporter of Ukraine. I was honored to receive Ukraine's Order of Merit from President Poroshenko. So I would have thought all of those things would have earned me a spot on this blacklist much earlier, but I'm honored finally to be added to this. And all I can say is anybody who's on Vladimir Putin's blacklist is, I think, on the right side of history.
Go ahead with your follow-up, Aaron.
A different topic here. You mentioned earlier how many, sort of briefly ran through some of the announcements that your fellow cabinet members have made over the week. You've been busy. It seems like we get a few, releases every day. I'm wondering, how much of this is the pressing business of government, and how much of it is, trying to have some sort of a pitch to those folks that are going to be voting in that leadership review that you've been doing a good job, that your government is getting the job done for them. And
well, we've never down.
On how that
Thanks. Sorry to interrupt. Sorry, I thought you were done.
No,
we've never downed tools. We've always kept our nose to the grindstone, even right through the COVID crisis, the collapse of the world economy, the collapse of energy prices, 3 once-in-a-century crises. We didn't down tools. In fact, we sat more as a legislature than any in Canada by far, passed more legislation, because we got elected with a ridiculously ambitious platform, 375 items, and we've only added more and more work to that. In fact, the thing that we just announced today, these important initiatives for job protection, those were not in the platform. Those are good ideas that came from community groups since we took office. Yesterday, responding to the Ukrainian refugee crisis, the day before the emerging skills shortage in Alberta. So we're responding to issues in real time. It's our job as a government. That's not linked to internal party matters. In fact, to be honest, I suspect the vast majority of United Conservative members have already cast their ballots, and I think that the decision's probably already made. It's on its way through tens of thousands of ballots to the accounting firm, and I'll await the results in a few weeks, but we have never downed tools despite multiple crises and occasional distractions politically.
Thank you. Operator, could you please put through our next caller?
Tim Brook, CTV.
Hi, this one's for the Premier. Alberta is last in the country in booster shots. I know your health minister yesterday announced a new campaign to try to get those numbers up a little bit, but I'm just wondering, does your government have any other plans that will, hopefully right this ship?
Yeah, as Minister Copping said yesterday, the Alberta government will be launching a renewed effort to encourage folks to get the third shot. As you know, we've also expanded eligibility for a fourth shot, particularly for seniors. And it is important because the best way people can protect themselves and our healthcare system from COVID and its new variants is by getting the additional protection of that third shot. The evidence around the world is very clear on that. We do have good reason to believe that the worst of COVID is behind us. We can't say that with absolute certainty. We don't know what strange variants may come up in the future, but the history of these contagious respiratory viruses is one where over time they become less severe as population protection builds up on the other side. And that appears to be what's happening through most of the world on COVID right now with Omicron and the BA2 subvariant. Many European countries and states and provinces in eastern side of our continent got hit by the BA2 subvariant wave weeks before Alberta, and none of them have brought in additional restrictions or faced a threat to their healthcare system. So that's what gives us reason to believe that the worst is behind us. But the best way to ensure that the worst is behind us is for people to stand up and get the third dose. And what concerns me is that, I think we've reached the absolute outer limit of the number of people who will get a first or second dose at about 90. We're at 91% of adults with the first dose, 87% second dose. But what concerns me is about half of those folks that got the second dose, these are obviously people who believe in the effectiveness of vaccines, they've not come forward for the third. Now, one reason for that may be a large number of people obviously got Omicron infections over December, January into February, and they may be deciding just to hold off because they will have a period of enhanced natural immunity from that prior infection. So we would encourage those folks to step forward. The research on this is clear that antibodies acquired through prior infection can be very good at, for at least a period of time, at protecting people from severe outcomes. But antibodies plus the vaccine is the most effective way.
Go ahead with your follow-up, Tim.
You so often mention that immunity from infection, how important it is to, the bottom line. Over the last, year or 6 months, has your personal definition of fully vaccinated changed? Like, do you think some people are okay with just 2 shots and then that infection?
Well, on an issue like that, it's really more of a scientific issue, and I defer to the medical and scientific experts. Alberta's Advisory Committee on Immunization and the National Advisory Committee on Immunization both define fully vaccinated as having received 2 of the approved COVID vaccine doses in a 2-dose series, I should say. And so we accept the advice that they give us, and of course that's been confirmed by Dr. Hinshaw. At some point they decide to change that, we'll take that advice on board. But right now, I think pretty much every country in the world is regarding the 2 shots as consisting of being fully vaccinated.
Thank you. Operator, can you please put through our next caller?
Audrey Nouveau, Radio-Canada.
Hi, my question can be for the Premier, if you can answer in French, but for another person also on the bill. I want to know if abortion is covered, because I can imagine a number of cases where the parents, cannot or will not bring the child to term, and that can cause them great grief too. So is it covered? And if not, why not?
It's not on the legislation.
For the bereavement. Sorry.
Kaycee, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Kaycee Madu here, Minister of Labour and Immigration. I'm happy to answer that question. So if you take a look at what we have announced, there is nothing in the bill or in the messaging that prohibit someone who have gone through abortion from having the benefit of this bill. But at the end of the day, these are conversations that the bill will allow Albertans to have with their employers. We don't ask them to provide a deep circumstances under which they are requesting for the bill, except to say that it will be in cases of miscarriage and loss of pregnancies. And there's a wide latitude of flexibility there for Albertans to have that conversation with their employers. Thank you.
Je crois que vous voulez une traduction en français pour dire que les balises, les critères pour cette mesure dans le projet de loi sont très larges, sont très générales. Alors, c'est effectivement une décision pour l'Albertaine de décider s'ils ont besoin, il y a eu une perte de vie et ils ont besoin de cette période de reculement. Alors, c'est une protection très générale.
Thank you. And with no other callers.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Audrey,
can I have my follow-up,
yeah.
please? Yes, thank you. And I'll ask you, Premier, just to say in French again, what is your reaction to being put on that sanction list from Russia?
C'est un honneur d'être ajouté aux listes noires de Vladimir Poutine. Ma seule question est pourquoi est-ce que ça a pris tellement de temps? Parce que moi, j'étais ministre de la Défense nationale qui a envoyé les forces canadiennes dans le programme de formation militaire en Ukraine, les ressources militaires et l'intelligence. J'étais récipient de prix de l'Ukraine par le président Poroshenko intérieurement. Alors, ce n'est pas exactement secret que je suis toujours un allié profond de l'Ukraine. Alors, c'est un honneur, enfin, d'être ajouté à cette liste noire. Je crois que tout le monde qui se trouve dans cette liste noire de la Russie, ils sont dans le bon côté de l'histoire.
Thank you, Premier. And with no other callers in the queue, that concludes our press conference.
Thanks, everybody.